Hi, it's James again, and figured I'd do my other list since there was two that I wanted to do the most. One of which I just did, which was the top 10 dramas, and the other one, which is the top 10 fantasy films. And it's not necessarily strictly fantasy, as in like dragons and elves and all that kind of thing, but fantasy as in fantastical elements, or just something that not exactly is occurring within our reality. Not sci-fi, but fantasy. So, number 10, so top 10 fantasy. Number 10, we have a film from 1986 called The Boy Who Could Fly. And you've basically got a young girl and her brother, played by Lucy Deakins, and her younger brother is Fred Savage. I think it's in one of his early roles. It's around that, he looks young enough that it's around the time of Princess Bride, I believe. And sort of like them just living in a house, but the next door neighbor is there's a boy who doesn't really talk at all. He just seems very mysterious and unusual. And the daughter strikes up a friendship with him, and his father is played by Fred Gwynne from like Pet Sematary, Addams Family kind of thing, Secret of My Success. So while she's getting to know the boy next door, Fred Savage is also just trying to get around the block. And the thing was, he's trying to get around the block because every time he tries to go around the block, he's confronted with bullies and also a pretty threatening dog. So his mission in life is to get around the block. And the two stories run parallel throughout the movie, and you get to find out more about the boy next door and his father, and also about the girl herself. And it's, I don't really want to say much more than that. It's a very 80s movie, but and I haven't seen it in a long time, but a lot of the movie stays pretty fresh with me. But it's about the experience of the movie, so I don't want to say too much about it. The title does make sense in the end, but it's just it's a well worthwhile. It's a definitely a gem of the 80s movies. The Boy Who Could Fly. That was number 10. Number 9, coincidentally, is another Fred Savage movie, although this one's he's starring in it, and this one's called Little Monsters. And this is where the family moves to a new town, and Fred Savage's little boy he has to make a whole new set of friends, and he ends up interrupting someone it sounds like they're breaking into his house, but it's sort of like a monster, this like blue monster with horns and stuff, played by played by Howie Mandel. Very funny role by Howie Mandel, and unrecognizable except for his voice, but under the makeup you'd never tell it was Howie Mandel. And so you basically he interrupts Howie Mandel's character. What's his name? Maurice. And they finding out that he's a monster, and they come out from other kids' beds, and basically they're the reason why, like, the dog ate your homework, or you lost certain things that are important. Basically all the things that parents blame the kids for all the trouble they cause is caused by these monsters. And he takes them down into his world for several times, and he sort of like they become friends, and he gets to go out and mess with people who've messed with him, like bullies and stuff, like pee in their apple juice jar, or like put dog food on their tuna fish sandwiches. And what he doesn't realize is Maurice is doing this so that slowly, the more he hangs out with him and does all this mischievous acts with him, he's slowly becoming a monster. And he realizes he has to stop this before he becomes a full monster. Maurice is starting to feel guilty about this too, because he's not in charge. This one kid, lead monster named Boy, is in charge. A character portrayed by, who I never realized this when I was a kid, because who would know? But as I got older, I would go back and watch it. It's like, holy crap, it's Frank Whaley from like Swimming with Sharks and Career Opportunities and Vacancy and any number of other things. But it's a great, very funny, very charming 80s movie. Little Monsters. Number 8, we have a movie called Outlander. Now, this one stars Jim Caviezel. You got Ron Perlman, Jack Huston, Sophia Myles from the Underworld, well, first Underworld movie at least. And John Hurt is in there. And it's sort of it's loosely based on the poem Beowulf. And it's basically Jim Caviezel's character. What's his name? Does he have a name? I can't remember. I'm not sure it says. Anyway, he's piloting a spacecraft through space, and he lands on a planet, not Earth, and ends up meeting up with these sort of like a Viking tribe. And the reason he's there is he's tracking a monster, a sort of dragon kind of space monster that I can't remember if it says that he unwittingly let loose or it escaped or something, but he's tracking it, and it's basically an almost unkillable monster, but he is tasked with tracking it down and slaying it, sort of slaying the dragon, slaying Beowulf or something. And it's one of the few, it's a bit of a spoiler to say, but there's always like certain movies where a traveler from far away comes to a planet or a village and becomes ingratiated with the people in the culture there and saves the day, but leaves at the end of the movie. Sort of like Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes. He could have stayed, but he left. They have his friends there, he has a loved one, and then he leaves and stuff. But in this one, he does end up staying at the end of the movie, and it's a very sweet ending. But the cinematography and the effects and the acting are really the key points of this movie here, because it is really well done, really neat, and I don't think it's talked about hardly at all. It's called Outlander. Number 7, we have a movie called I Kill Giants. Now this one has an amazing poster that you'll see, and I kind of picked it up based on that. It said from the producers of Harry Potter. It's called I Kill Giants, and it has an awesome poster. It's not exactly what it's about. It's sort of a young girl who has a vivid imagination, sort of like in the vein of Bridge to Terabithia, where they have created this fantasy world to cope with some tragedy in their life, and that's exactly what she has done. But she claims that like she protects her town from giants, and she's killed I don't know how many giants in the last month. And she ends up meeting this social worker who wants to get to know her and see what's behind all this, not psychosis, but all these fantastical elements that she's incorporated into her life. And it's got a bit of a there's certain things like she won't go upstairs in her house, and you don't know why. She's always listening to this same recording of I think of a baseball game down in the basement, and you don't know why. But by the end of the movie, everything is explained. It's not something that leaves things ambiguous or anything. The events of the movie are explained, but it is impressive. The girl's performance. What is her name? Madison Wolfe. You've also got Imogen Poots in there. You've got Zoe Saldana, Jennifer Ale. Everyone does a great job. Apparently it's based on a graphic novel, which I haven't seen anywhere, but I don't really read those that much. But it would be interesting to see the similarities between the two. That one is called I Killed Giants. Number six, we have a movie called Lost River. And this was the directorial debut of Ryan Gosling. And in terms of directorial debuts, this could have made my list. I don't believe it did. It was the second video I ever did for this channel. But I think it was a very, very impressive directorial debut. So you basically got, like, Christina Hendricks plays a single mother, and her kid named Bones, played by Ian DeCastecker. I don't know if I pronounced his name properly. And it's basically about sort of both of them. Like, she's a struggling single mother, and she ends up getting a job in this underground... I'm not entirely sure what you would call it, but these people go down into these underground clubs, and they watch these beautiful women come out on stage and appear to disfigure and cut themselves up, stuff that would kill a normal person. But it's all just makeup. It's like someone will, like, carve and peel off parts of their face, and you see blood running down, but it's actually just all makeup. But people pay to see this. It's almost like a stripper, and instead of taking off clothes, they're taking off skin or whatever, but not really. But it's a way she's found to make a living. And you've got Ben Mendelsohn is in there. What's her name? Eva Mendes is in there. She's one of the main performers in the club. And you've got Matt Smith, one of the iterations of Doctor Who. Is basically, it takes place in Detroit, and he's basically the main bad guy, the criminal element in town, and he kind of butts heads with Bones. And it's sort of Bones trying to navigate the Detroit streets and survive against his name is Bully. That's Matt Smith's character. But there's also a thing about these towns that were flooded, whether by because it was a failing town or whatever. But there's an underwater town, and you have him go swim down there to see, like, street lights and cars and houses and stuff, but it's all underwater. Beautiful looking cinematography. But it's just, it's a weird movie. I won't deny it. The movie's not for everyone, but I was really impressed by it, and I was really entranced by the story that Ryan Gosling told in this movie. It was like, well done, Ryan. Okay, number 5, we have a movie called A Ghost Story. And this was done by David Lowery. He did Ain't Them Body Saints. That was my first experience with him. Beautiful movie with Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara. And he also did that remake of Pete's Dragon. Well, the money he made from Pete's Dragon, he used to secretly shoot A Ghost Story. Basically, after they had done the movie, they announced that, oh, look, we made this movie, Ghost Story, here's the trailer. So they shot the movie in secret. And it's pretty much just Casey Affleck, Rooney Mara, and there's a few other actors throughout the movie because Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara are married, and then Casey Affleck dies in a car accident. And then he's in the hospital, and instead of going towards the light, he's covered in this sheet like a traditional ghost with the eye holes cut out, and he basically sticks around. Rooney Mara sticks around his house where Rooney Mara is still living. And it sort of plays with time where he sticks around while she's there, and then she grows up and leaves, and then sticks around the house, and time keeps passing all the way up into years, decades into the future. And then all of a sudden it goes back and starts over back in like frontier or pioneer times and keeps going. And it's an interesting way to tell the story. One of the more interesting, I thought, aspects of the movie, I thought, was sort of like the frame that the movie is shot in looks very much like a square, like those slide projectors, the little cards you'd put in with the frame, and it's a very square frame. Well, that's how the movie's shot. It would be like just cutting off this, and you just see a square instead of like the widescreen. But it has the rounded edges, so it looks like those slide photographs. Very, very good movie. Not a lot of dialogue, except from certain characters throughout the movie, but a lot of it is following this ghost, played by Casey Affleck, and obviously he's not talking, he's just observing all this going on. Beautiful movie. A ghost story. Number 4, we have a movie called Every Day. This was from a couple years ago, and it's sort of it focuses on sort of this girl named Rhiannon and this character just known as A. And A is considered a traveling spirit who basically wakes up every day in the body of someone else. He inhabits someone else's body, takes over their body for a day, and lives that person's life for one day. And it's always someone of the same age as A, because you don't know if it's a boy or a girl. Just keeps inhabiting a boy or a girl every single day of their life. It's always someone of similar age and close proximity. So like if A were to occupy a body and drive to New York and wake up the next day, they would wake up in someone's body, probably somewhere in New York City. And of course then the body that they went to bed in would have to find some way to get home because they'd be there without knowing how. And A comes into contact with Rhiannon and sort of falls in love with Rhiannon, whether A is being in a man's body or a woman's body, girl's body or boy's body. And at some point in the movie, A figures out that they can extend their stay in a body for a day or two. But the problem is they start to not destroy, but take over the person's body, and they begin to lose themselves, the person they're occupying. So they have to make a choice on whether to stay in that body or jump to another one. And how could you really be in a relationship with someone who you couldn't get married and have a child, because then all of a sudden that person's not there the next day, and then they're in another body the next day and another body the next day. And that's sort of the struggle throughout the movie. Very interesting. I believe it's based on a novel, but the movie itself is very, very, very interesting. Every Day. Number 3, we have a movie called City of Ember, and this is based on a series of young adult novels, and I think there's 3, but the movie didn't make enough money, wasn't well received, so they only made the one. And it's basically years ago, when they thought that the world was probably going to end, the society moved underground. And the intention was, they have this box with all their secrets and technology inside, and they set a timer, and then when it counts down to however many years, the box will open up, they'll take stuff out, and they'll rejoin society. Well, the box gets buried in the back of a closet for centuries, and it was supposed to be passed down through mayor to mayor to mayor from this underground town that they live in, way underground. And it gets stashed away and it gets forgotten about. So you've got this society of people that keeps going, and these kids, when they become of a certain age, I think it's job day. I think that's what it's called, or career day. They find out what job they're going to have. And so you've basically got Harry Treadaway, Saoirse Ronan, Bill Murray as the current mayor, Martin Landau is one of the old workers that Harry Treadaway works with, because he works underground with the pipes and stuff. Problem is that the town is starting to break down, like the pipes are breaking, the electricity's going, and just after so many years, the town itself is going to fail. And so they end up finding this box. The kids end up finding this box and realizing that there was an intentional plan for that this was only going to be temporary, and they eventually would leave. So they start following these instructions on the eventual, I guess, escape plan, or plan to rejoin society up above. But you don't know if the world has actually ended. It's been so long. So that's the mystery of the movie. And probably would have been expanded on or solved had they continued on with it, but they didn't. But what you got is still a very impressive, harmless, fantasy-ish film like Bridge to Terabithia or some of the early Harry Potter movies. Very charming. You've also got Toby Jones and Tim Robbins in there too. Number 2, we have a movie called Tale of Tales. This one I picked up and watched not too long ago. Just found it in a store, thought it looked interesting. With all the cast members in this one, I mean, Salma Hayek, Vincent Cassel, Toby Jones, another Toby Jones movie, John C. Reilly. And it's based on a series of Italian fairy tales. And it's sort of in the vein of the Grimm fairy tales, where, I mean, there's the fairy tales that are all nice and dandy and always a happy ending. But there's the Grimm fairy tales that some of them get pretty dark. Well, these ones are very, very on the dark side. And you've sort of got a king and queen, John C. Reilly and Salma Hayek, and sort of, you've got 3 different kingdoms. Salma Hayek and John C. Reilly have their own thing where he has to go, they want to have a child, and they make a deal with this dark, shadowy figure where he has to go kill this albino sea dragon, sea serpent, and like eat the heart, and she'll become pregnant, and he dies in the process, and she has to live with raising her son without a father. And you've also got Vincent Cassel as the king of another kingdom, and he hears a beautiful voice singing in a town nearby, and he must meet her, he must have her. But her and her sister are very old and hideous looking sort of witches, so they have to figure out a way to fool him into thinking that the one sister is beautiful to get to be with him, because he's this handsome, rich king. And then there's the third king, played by Toby Jones, who has a daughter who he one day hopes to marry off. But he also has this fascination with this flea. And he becomes infatuated with this flea and, like, raising it and feeding it. It's basically his pet, his friend, and it becomes huge. It's very strange. But the movie itself is gorgeous. And it was one of those ones where I'm watching it, I'm just like, I gotta know how this movie ends. I don't know where it's going. But it's very, very fascinating. And it is. The movie is very fascinating. It was just one of those ones where, like, I'd never heard of it. No idea this existed. this looks interesting. Picks it up, and it's amazing. So good. Tale of Tales. Number one is a movie called Wendy. And I mentioned this on my very first video when I talked about my top 25 of the decade. I talked about Beasts of the Southern Wild from Ben Zeitlin film. This is the one I mentioned, which he spent years, then he finally did a follow-up to Beasts of the Southern Wild. And this was his film Wendy, which is his take on the Peter, Wendy and the Lost Boys film. So you've basically got a girl who's not really happy with her life, a young girl, and she ends up hopping a train with these other kids and meets up with Peter and these other kids, and they're driving along on the train, and they get to this one part on the bridge above this water, and the kid's like, okay, time to go, and pushes them off into the water. And they end up swimming to this nearby island, where apparently they never grow old. It's almost like this is the location of Neverland. And you've got Peter and these other kids and Wendy, and there's these two twin brothers, and the one disappears, and they ended up finding him later, but in the meantime, the other brother loses hope, and there's these old people on the other side of the island, and they're the ones that lost hope and lost the desire to stay young, and they ended up growing old very rapidly, and he ends up becoming one of them. And it's sort of an origin story for Peter, Wendy, and Captain Hook. And it's just a very, very... It's not quite as good as Beasts of the Southern Wild, but it doesn't miss it by much. It's gorgeous. And it's a very unique, original origin story for Peter Pan and Wendy and the Lost Boys and Captain Hook and stuff. The whole lot. So good, so good. And I'm glad he waited this long to do it, because he did such a fantastic job. Just about as fantastic a job as Beasts of the Southern Wild. So that one is called Wendy. So that was the end of that list. So I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you enjoy the other one. Thank you for watching, and toodles.